Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, host also of RT's talk show, Crosstalk. Well, the other day, the United Nations Security Council had yet another meeting on the humanitarian situation in Syria. All of the parties made their familiar pitches, and most notable was the pitch presented by Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the thrust of which was that the horrible Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad and his Russian allies are preventing humanitarian aid from reaching Syria. Here was the United States, the United Kingdom, all the good guys in the world trying their darndest to make sure that the Syrian people have food and medicine and any emergency aid. And so it went on. All the usual US allies made exactly the same pitch. Open up these border crossings to let the aid in. Now, completely absent from anything that Blinken said or what the UK said or what France said was any acknowledgement that Syria, the reason why there is starvation in Syria, why Syrians are living in misery and poverty, is on account of the sanctions that were unilaterally imposed on Syria by the United States, by the European Union. They are preventing food and medicine from reaching Syria. And the sanctions have become even more brutal since the passage of the Caesar Act last year. Also unacknowledged was that the United States has basically helped itself to Syria's oil. So that, we're just, as when Trump said, we're just keeping the oil. So therefore, the extraction, refining, and sales of oil, that's taken out of the hands of the Syrian government. So the Syrian government is unable to use its own natural resources to feed its own people. Agricultural land is also under the control of the United States. So again, Syrian government unable to provide food for its people. Syrian government and the Russians have said, well, if you want to deliver aid, go through the country and acknowledge the sovereignty of the Syrian government, and then you can use the roads, railways of Syria to get the aid to whoever you want to get the aid to. But they don't want to do that. The United States, UK, France, they don't want to do that. They want to use these border crossings as a way of delegitimizing the Syrian government, so they can just step in, refuse to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Syrian government, and then deliver aid largely to Idlib, which is under the control of the terrorists, the Al-Qaeda types. And the Syrian government rightly points out that when this aid is delivered, it's actually the people who help themselves to the aid are the terrorists. And then whatever's left over, whatever food or medicine is left over, they might distribute or might not to the people. So this sanctimonious exercise, which we've now become used to, is presented in the media as the humanitarianism of the United States and the horrible callousness and cold-bloodedness of the Russians and the Syrians. Peter, what's your take?
Well, thank you for sending me the link of his Blinken's comments. It made my blood boil. I mean, the Orwellian language, it's surreal. No acknowledgement of the role that the United States has played in arming, training, and financing terrorist groups to fight against the legitimate government of Syria. It is simply outrageous. I mean, Pulp Fiction is, at least it's entertaining. This doesn't even reach the level of Pulp Fiction. This is a world turned upside down. As you pointed out, the United States unilaterally, and in some cases the EU, have put sanctions on countries and companies that want to send aid. There are Syrian doctors as individuals that try to travel outside the country and they bring it back in their suitcases,
Right.
medicine that
Right.
is desperately needed.
Right.
And you know what's insult to injury, George, is that the United States and its allies and its 31 flavors of terrorists, they lost that conflict. They lost it.
Right.
And they won't even acknowledge the right of Syrians to rebuild the country, even though they do not control complete sovereignty over their borders. But they're limiting them to what they can do within the area that the government controls. This is just spitefulness. It's mean.
Right.
It's arrogant.
Right.
And the fact that he's talking about, you know how these politicians, they talk about this woman that had to cut her hair and sell it for $55 to feed. Well, I mean, that woman wouldn't have to be doing that, Mr. Secretary, if your government wouldn't happen. So if you hadn't put and continued with these sanctions. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous what they're talking about here. And what's really irritating, George, is that the French and the British, they all just do their nodding heads. Okay, I mean, it seems like the one person wrote all of their remarks. Okay, it shows that they have no interest in resolving a humanitarian crisis that they created.
Right.
That they created. And the United States it just kind of remind everyone here, the United States is illegally occupying territory in Syria. And now the evil Russians, you say, well, the Syrian government invited Russia to help protect itself against an outside assaults and non-government organizations like terrorist groups. I mean, this is very real. Under the UN Charter, a government has the right to request assistance. That's exactly what happened, and it happened in September 2015.
That's right. That's exactly right. So what the US and the EU are doing now, not only have they imposed these brutal sanctions, they're also preventing any company from providing any reconstruction aid. They are also doing their damnedest to prevent others from providing Syria with oil. Remember the Iranian tanker that was seized by the British at Gibraltar?
Piracy.
Yeah, a couple of years ago on the dubious premise that, it's doing something illegal in delivering oil to Syria, which Iran anyway denied that. But even if Iran was delivering it, there's nothing illegal about it. There are no UN sanctions on Syria. And the sanctions don't even apply to Iran because the EU sanctions are only that EU entities cannot do business with Syria. It doesn't apply to non-EU entities like Iran. Iran can do whatever it likes. EU doesn't have any jurisdiction over Iran. And then they have the goal to go before the United Nations and then, beat their breasts about how they're trying desperately to provide food to the wretched Syrian people. And it's all Assad's fault. And as you say, denying their role in fueling this horrible conflict, which is now 10 years old. I mean, it's now the 10-year anniversary of the start of the quote Arab Spring unquote, which the US, the UK, and France tried to exploit to their advantage. So, go ahead.
The Assad government is genuinely popular within the confines of the area that it controls. I mean, one thing that's liberals don't like to admit because somehow they're embarrassed by it, but the Assad government protects religious minorities, particularly Christians. Okay, so do you think that, if a black flag ended up on top of in Damascus, what would be the fate of the Christian minority? I think it would be dire, okay, considering the slaughter that these people are willing to commit. I mean, remember, I guess it's been a while, but these are the head choppers, guys. These are the head choppers out there. And they're supported by Western governments.
And they're still there in Idlib. I mean, this has been acknowledged by US government officials whenever they suddenly blurt something out. They have to justify their presence in the Middle East. Oh yeah, we're fighting against ISIS. We're fighting against Al-Qaeda. And then they blurt out that Idlib is the biggest center for Al-Qaeda in the world. Well, I wonder how that comes about. Well, maybe it's because you're essentially providing Idlib with defense. by threatening Russia and Syria that we will take military action if you attempt to take Idlib. So this just continues. And so, there's no secret about this, that Idlib is controlled by Al Qaeda, and any aid that is delivered to Idlib will go into the hands of Al Qaeda, and then they will decide what they want to do with this aid. Maybe sell it to buy arms. So the whole idea, we're trying to deliver food and medicine to the Syrian people, absolute crock.
Yeah, and then let's remind everyone, in the waning days of the Obama administration, Secretary Kerry with Sergei Lavrov, they had brokered not one, but two ceasefires. And who busted up both ceasefires? Particularly the second one, Ash Carter, the defense secretary. To this day, I would really like to know what kind of conversation Kerry and Ash Carter had after he ordered the assaults on Syrian forces that busted up. I mean, the ceasefire, the ink was still wet on the document, and that was an intentional measure to make sure that there could be no compromise here. This is the same government that obstructs ceasefires, and they're talking about humanitarian aid to people. Yes. The hypocrisy stinks to heaven. And Tony Blinken should be ashamed of himself, absolutely ashamed of a government of 10 years trying to destroy the South. I guess it's the last secular regime in the Middle East.
Well, that's exactly right. And of course, the media coverage, they just completely unquestioningly accept, oh my God, these border crossings are being closed. How cruel and callous and horrible these awful Russians are to close these border crossings. Well, there's a way to deliver aid. You use the proper government channels. You use the roads and the railways in Syria and go through the country and deliver the aid. That's all that's the Syrian government is asking. They just don't like you using these border crossings that refuse to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Syrian government. And Blinken admits that. Blinken actually, in that address to the United Nations, admits that the goal is to refuse to acknowledge the legitimacy of the Syrian government, because ultimately it's still the policy of the US government to a change of government in Damascus. They don't know how they're going to do it. They don't know, but they're just hoping that somehow if they can inflict sufficient misery on Syria, maybe somehow Bashar al-Assad will disappear.
Well, this gets to the crux of it. So the United States has taken upon itself to make a determination of what country is sovereign, what is not. I mean, last time I heard, George, Syria is a member of the United Nations, okay? Right. It is recognized by the United Nations as a sovereign state. The United States has no right under the UN Charter to determine who rules in Damascus, though the American public is never told that. Because if you question American foreign policy vis-a-vis Syria, like Tulsi Gabbard did, you're a toady, okay? No, it's the media that is intentionally turning a blind eye to misery. And it would only take a few reporters, people like, again, we kind of mention Aaron Mate a lot here, Max Blumenthal. You can find these things out. And Blinken's speech is so propagandistic. It's really shameful, because there is real suffering in Syria. And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. This is an intentional policy to create and maintain a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, it really is. And again, reporters could certainly ask, why does it have to be the border crossing? Why can't you just, use the normal channels to deliver aid? Could ask that. And then they're going to ask, why is this such a big deal for the United States? Who rules in Damascus? I mean, for years and years, the United States was able to live with the Assad family ruling in Damascus. Richard Nixon even visited Damascus during his term in office. So why the sudden hysteria that you can't live with a government? After all, it's the government of Syria. It's not the government in Washington. It's not the government in London or Paris. It's up to the Syrian people to decide this, which is incidentally what the Russians always say. Oh, you're backing Assad. You're his backer and so on. He's just saying, no, we're not backing Assad. We just say it's up to the Syrian people to decide whom they want as their government. Not up to us. But but no reporter ever raises that issue with these Blinken or others.
Well, we here at the Gaggle, we had Ambassador Ford on, remember, and we talked about Syria, and he made it very, very clear. He made it very, very clear that, and he was an ambassador to Syria, so he knew what was going on. He knew a lot of people there, and he was telling us that his interlocutors, the Syrians, were saying, we don't want to be thrown into the arms of Iran. We want to be independent. We don't want to be thrown into the arms of Russia. We want to be an independent country. And see, what American-led policy has done exactly the opposite of what they wanted to have happen, okay? Because when you're in desperate need, you look for allies. And this is what the result is. The result is, again, I will repeat it, 6 weeks and 25 planes, and Russia defeated the caliphate. Trump likes to take credit for it. That's fine. I have no problem with it. I don't care, because I care about the result, okay? The caliphate was destroyed. And it's never given proper recognition how that was done.
Right. Right. No, that's right. But then, the national security state rolled Trump, deceived him, told him a whole lot of nonsense. Well, we need to stay because of the Kurds. The Kurds are the greatest allies America's ever had. And when Trump, amusingly, but not in a way, in the end, ineffectively said, I don't remember the Kurds being with us on Normandy beaches in June 1944. But nonetheless, he went along with the national security apparatus. And then they got a very clever idea into his head, the one that they knew would appeal to him. How about we take the oil? And that goes, and that appeals to his real estate brain. Oh yeah, let's take the oil. We'll keep the oil. What are you going to do with the oil? Well, we'll just keep it. And so then basically again, America sees the oil that it doesn't need, but it's causing a humanitarian disaster because now Syria can't derive the benefits from its own natural resources.
We have American diplomats openly telling the liberal lamestream media, legacy media, that U.S. policy is to create, quote unquote, a quagmire in Syria. See, what's in play here, and what Blinken is doing here, is that it's kind of, I always kind of look at Syria and Western policy, it's like a roulette wheel. They keep turning the wheel and throwing the ball in till they get their number, okay? Oop, we're gonna have to do it again, turn the wheel and throw it in, and because they want to determine the outcomes here. And since they can't, or do not have the means or the people on the ground to do it, they will keep it a mess until they can get what they want. That's it in a nutshell.
I agree, because it is like a gambler, because once it worked, so they're always convinced that it's going to work again the next time. So they just keep doing it. So, for instance, like the U.S. policy toward Russia is, well, let's get rid of Putin. Once we get rid of Putin, then we're going to get another Gorbachev, Yeltsin type, and everything's going to be back to the glorious days of the 90s. And, that's their fate. So, let's get rid of Assad, and then we'll have some good guy, that we can work with. I mean, Putin, I think in some interview, I think he did it in the Financial Times interview, he said, whenever I talk to my American colleagues and I say to them, okay, if you get rid of Bashar al-Assad, who comes after him? And they always tell me, well, we don't know. Well, they don't care. They don't even think about, what's the next step. Well, we don't know. I mean, let's hope it'll be someone good. Let's keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's like we get rid of Saddam and everything will be fine. Right. Okay. Now as we speak, George, the political class in Iraq is demanding again American troops leave their country. Right. Saddam's gone, right. But Iraq's national interests don't change. Right. Okay, they don't change. Syria will still be there when Assad leaves, whenever that is. Right. Oh, and what about popular will? I mean, if he's liked and he's wanted there, what about Gaddafi's son in Libya? If he could cobble together a coalition, you believe in democracy, right? You believe in democracy. So if the son of Gaddafi can pull it off like his father, who's to say differently? Right. Because it's democratic, George.
Right. But the strange thing is that these humanitarians, a la Blinken, think that it's incumbent upon them to decide the fate of nations. I mean, remember, it was Biden who was advocating at some point during the Iraq war, hey, why don't we partition Iraq? Let's just chop it up into three, as if somehow it's up to the United States. It's up to Biden to decide whether Iraq should be one state or three. As if like they're like imperial overlords. I mean, it was bad enough when it was a Churchill or Lloyd George sitting there over maps of the Middle East. This is how we're going to carve out the Middle East. But now, I mean, it's a little bloody late for that.
Yes, exactly. So they're going to do it. They want to do the same kind of partition they did at the end of the First World War when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Sykes-Picot, you want to do that all over again?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Western imperialism created these countries. Okay. Right. They created them. All right. Now, the United Nations has recognized them as they are. It is up to the people. Oh, let's cobble together a Kurdistan. Let's make all these countries give up land to create Kurdistan. I mean, imperial overlords, they're addicted to it. And you know what? It doesn't solve anything.
No, it doesn't solve it. And I think that goes back to that kind of reckless policy. It is like somebody once coined that term, the empire of chaos. They somehow think, well, chaos is great because then there's all the more
Max Blumenthal
for the United States. It's like, the arsonist who sets fires by day, and then he's got, hey, I've got my work cut out at night working in the fire department. So that's kind of what the United States, let's break up Syria. So Syria breaks up. It'll be an absolute god-awful mess. There'll be massacres. Most horrific genocide will probably take place. Oh, nice. All the more reason for more U.S. involvement. NATO can get in on the act. Stoltenberg can posture. The UK can return. The French can return. Hey, this is, we have our historic links.
Don't forget about Israel.
And Israel.
Don't forget about Israel.
Yeah. So so they're all for. Let's break it up. We don't care about what happens to all these. That's why these sort of meetings at the UN are so disgusting, when these people pretend that really they're just overflowing with the milk of human kindness. They're just breaking.
They literally broke Iraq, and we had a sectarian war that it was unbelievable, a sectarian war that happened because of the illegal invasion. Then you have the misuse of a United Nations Security Council resolution in Libya. What happened to Libya? It broke up. It is still a failed state. All right. We could go on and on. You have no learning curve whatsoever.
No.
You know why, George? Because what is the downside? I mean, maybe eventually there'll be blowback and there'll be terrorist attacks in the United States. But
again, even that doesn't have a downside, because then you say, hey, global war on terror. We're back, baby. All the good old days are back. And so, yeah, there really is no downside. The only possible downside is what happened in 2016, when some populist figure will emerge in America, said, we're fed up with this, and we don't need this blowback, which is what Trump was saying in 2016. We don't want all these, nutcases, jihadis over here because of the mess that you created in the Middle East. That's the only blowback. But in other George W. Bush style global war on terror, no blowback there.
Another thing it does is it empowers the Sultan of Turkey, okay, because he can turn the switch and open the floodgates and have refugees going all through Europe here. I mean, so you've empowered Erdogan in the process as well. Right. See, there's no upside here. I mean, from a logical point of view, a humanitarian point of view, all of this is wrong, and it all could easily be fixed.
Yep.
Get out of the Middle East.
Right. If tomorrow the United States said, we're going to try and resolve this with Russia. We're going to work this out. Let's work something out on Idlib, United States and Russia. This war has to come to an end. Erdogan may huff and puff, but he's not going to be able to stand up to the United States and Russia together. If they issue a joint ultimatum and say, that's it, your days in Idlib are over, that's going to happen. But it's not. But the Americans are not interested in this. They prefer posturing, having these UN meetings, and weeping about these damn border crossings, as if that was going to resolve anything. But it's wonderful PR. They get all the media attention. Well, once again, America is on the side of good. America is trying to deliver humanitarian aid.
They just don't want to be put out of business, do they? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's careers to be made in the military. You do your tour of Afghanistan and get another one of those ribbons on your chest. Oh, and then work for a defense contractor later. You check, you did everything you need to do. Then Blinken, he wants to create peace. You know, in his mind, he's a great peacemaker, but actually, I think your arsonist analogy is just perfect. Okay, well, you know, during the day he's setting on fires, and then he goes to the UN and talks about being a fireman putting out fires. It's absurd. It's simply absurd.
Oh yeah, that's it. Oh, thank you, Peter. We will, of course, be maintaining our laser-like focus on the doings of Anthony Blinken, and we are on Rumble. Look us up there, please. And if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.